We have Azeem Khan from the Islamic Circle of North America and Lieutenant Jim McCaffrey of the FDNY. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning. Azeem, let's start with you. You're a supporter of the building of the mosque in this location. Some folks are frustrated that supporters of the mosque are not open to potentially moving the mosque. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the reason that they've dug their heels is because they feel that their rights are potentially going to be violated. When it comes to having the right to have a house of worship.
But why not be open to compromise? This issue has offended so many Americans. When you look at the national polls, 70% of Americans against it. Locally, upwards of 50-60% are against it.
Well, the premise of being offended is to link the act of terrorism to our faith or our religion of Islam, when we would contend that the acts that took place that day are the polar opposite of what everything is that our religion stands for.
What do you say, though, when the Archbishop makes a comment saying that, look, in a similar, when Catholics were put in a similar situation, they chose not to build a convent near Jews that might have been survivors of the Holocaust because of the sensitivity, even though, you know, there were Christians involved in the saving of Jews during the war. So what do you say to a comment like that, saying, look, sometimes you just have to be sensitive to those who suffered, and that there is a different way to perhaps preach your message or to share your message with everyone?
Well, if we look into how the story came to be, we would argue that this is a manufactured story. There was an article on Salon.com, a piece of investigative journalism, where they tracked back where the story came from.
What manufactured in
this entire quote-unquote Ground Zero Mosque story. In 2009, on Fox News, Daisy Khan, the wife of Imam Abdul Rauf, was on Fox News, and they commended this project for being built to basically promote tolerance.
All right,
near Ground
we both
Zero.
work for Fox. I'm not familiar with that debate. We don't have time to get into that right now. Lieutenant, I want to ask you, your brother-in-law died on that day, on 9/11. You're with the FDNY to this day. Some of the backers of the mosque say that those who are opposed to it are anti-Islam. What do you say to that?
I think that misses the point entirely. A lot of the proponents of the mosque say that it has to do with the constitutional principle of freedom of religion. Let me be clear, nobody is, that I am associated with, and certainly not myself, is denying anyone their freedom of religion, their freedom to worship. To me, that misses the point completely. Well, I base my opposition on two main points. One is the main point, it's actually a multifaceted point of just sensitivity, decorum, respect, courtesy, and just common decency for the people who are really aggrieved and really hurting still since 9/11, and who are really aggrieved by the location of this mosque.
Azeem, if Americans, let me ask you, if Americans wanted to build a church, let's just say a church in Afghanistan or Iraq, and the people of that country were against it, I imagine that Americans would say, you know what, we don't want to offend them.
Well, there's a big difference between Afghanistan and America.
Well, certainly
Saudi Arabia, anywhere in the Middle East.
You don't find churches in Saudi Arabia.
For us to honor the legacy of those who died that day, we have to stand up for what America stands for, which is liberty and justice for all. So we cannot discriminate against one religion.
Why not reveal the funding of the mosque? I mean, that's something that has really bothered a number of people.
That is actually my second main point. The questionable ties that this particular imam has had in the past and currently, and what would that where would that take the funding? I mean, it raises a lot of questions that have yet to be answered, and I think they're legitimate questions that we should answer. If he now will accept donations from Saudi Arabia and Iran, if they would be provided.
And there are suspicions that he's a supporter of Hamas, a terrorist organization.
He won't denounce
well, actually,
I think those are significant and legitimate questions that we have a right to ask.
Azeem, supporters say that he is a peace-loving man, that he is moderate. Then why won't the imam denounce Hamas, which, by the way, has been considered a terrorist group by the U.S. government since at least 1995?
I don't see what Hamas has to do with this issue, but about the funding, the Part 51
because
project,
the U.S. considers it a terror group, and if he won't denounce Hamas,
then there's no reason for us to denounce it when the government has already claimed it to be a terrorist organization.
But to give Americans a greater sense of comfort.
But that has nothing to do with this issue.
Who is heading this up?
About the funding, they've said that they're open, and they've agreed to allow the State Department to vet who their funders will be. So, I mean, that's a big step, and that's, you know, that should be welcomed.
All right, Lieutenant Jim McCaffrey, let me give you the last word.
I would submit that if the proponents of this mosque would see the heartache, the anguish, the vitriol that has arisen out of this very divisive issue, if they were to have a bit of introspection and step back for a second and say, you know what, maybe we should move this mosque. If they did that, I submit that that would do more to bridge divides between cultures and religions than anything they could ever do from that mosque.
Compromise? Open to compromise in any way on the location?
That's up to the developers completely to decide. But President Obama was totally right when he said they have the right to build a house of worship on private property.
As he was talking about the legal right. Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. Azeem Khan with the Islamic Circle of North America and Lieutenant Jim McCaffrey, thank you so much for joining us today.